Okay, everybody, I'm going to try my best today to describe to you how this Ford power steering pump works. This one comes off of a, say, an 03, 04, 6.0 liter diesel Ford truck, Super Duty. And it's what I use to build the power steering pump that's on my Bronco 5.0 Explorer swap. So it's been apart, put back together a few times now, but I'm going to try to explain to you how to tear it apart and put it back together so that you could rebuild your own pump. The biggest problem with getting it apart, with doing anything to it, I guess I should start out here with some understanding here. First of all, we've got here the regulator piston, I guess you might call it, and it comes out of this hole right here. So it comes out of there, and there's a spring there, and this cap, whatever you want to call it, slides on the spring, and it would all go together like so. The trick to taking it apart, this cover right here, this round cover, has to come out, and it's got an O-ring seal around it so that it slides in there and seals around it. And you get it out, the easiest way I've found, this little hole right here in the side, stick a pick or something in it. You see I've got my vice grips on it, and I'm going to pop it like so, and you can see the snap ring in there starts to pop out. And at this point you just take a screwdriver and you run along through there, just kind of popping it up out of the groove. Now you got to be careful not to let it go flying, and it will eventually snap out of it. There we go. Now I'm going to take a pair of channel locks and grab it, and for mine it just pops out. I guess I should specify that at this point the shaft has now popped in. There's nothing holding the shaft in it. So at this point you can just push the shaft right on through. You see me putting my finger up in the hole there and pushing it out. And actually I have my hands on the back side of the shaft. Alright. And then there's one more part in there, a washer that comes out. And you can see the washer is a concave convex washer. It's a spring washer. And you want it with the smaller end, if you call that an end, the small side goes down. And it fits, well, it fits right around on there. And that's going to press against the face of this thing here, of this piece here, which also has a rubber O-ring around it. And that just kind of puts pressure against it to hold it all in line. And what it's going to do, y'all forgive me for not being well prepared and well versed in this. This is a first go at making the video on these things. So we got this pump assembly that came out of the hole. This is your pump assembly. I'm going to start with the fluid. Fluid obviously comes in the big hole. This is called your supply hole, supply line, whatever, and it goes in the top here. And it goes in here, and it works its way into this channel somehow, and I wasn't able to chase it all the way out, but it goes in here and it makes its way back out this line here, which has an Allen head plug on it. And what I find fascinating is the little tip sticking out in there. So the fluid goes in there, in here, into the regulator side, pressure regulator, and it works its way back out from this hole. You can see that little brass piece. It seems like a little pressed in brass or bronze piece that presses in there, and it channels the fluid back out this direction up at us here. And this plug with its funny shaped tip in the middle centers up on that hole, on that tube down in there. So you got fluid coming at us here, and it hits this plug and it turns around and it goes back in, and it comes out in that groove you see right here. So this plug is nothing but a fluid diverter, I guess you could say. It changes the direction. That's why the tip is pointed the way it is. The fluid hits the plug and is directed back around in a 180-degree motion. I find that fascinating, sort of. So anyway, I'm going to put that back in. That's honestly a piece that you do not have to take out to rebuild it. Now, if you do, I don't think the kit I had came with an O-ring for it. I took some Teflon tape and wrapped around that joker real tight so that when I put it in there, it's sealed for sure. I didn't have any leaks in it, okay? So now we got fluid coming out of this groove here. And you see this machine surface right here, and there's another one right here. I don't know how well you can see those. I don't have a flashlight to point in there with. But those two surfaces are where the O-rings right here and here line up and seal. So your pumping action is supplied here in the middle. So your oil goes in these two holes right here. One hole here, one hole there, if you can see those. I hope you can. So they go in there, and your oil is going to go through the pump, and I'm going to explain this in detail here in a minute. And it's going to come out right here in the front two holes. Now on the Super Duty pump, you've got one notch down in there. You don't have that part on the other side. On the Explorer pumps, you have one there and one over here. So when you put it together, you just line up these slots here where the oil is going to come out with those holes, and that also acts like a keyway sort of thing to key the pump into the hole and keeps it from just spinning freely. It will lock in one way or the other. It's kind of free to rotate just a little bit, and you'll see that as you put the plug in the hole, the rear cover, you'll have a little bit of movement there, and that's because, I'll take it apart here, you can see these pins right here and here. These two pins come out and they lock the rear cover with that front piece, that front seal part together. They lock it and clock it together. So I'm going to put that together. So let's take this thing apart and kind of walk through it. To explain how it pumps fluid, let's start with the actual vanes. This is what we would call a rotary vane pump, I believe is what I'd call it. It's in the industry I come from. It's a rotary vane. These little grooves right here are called the vanes, and rotary because it makes a rotary circle. But you can see that the casing here, and I don't know the right terminology for this, but hopefully when I'm done you'll have an understanding of how this thing works. You can see the casing is oblonged. As this thing turns, these vanes slide out of their grooves out against the casing, and whichever way it's rotating, which is actually this way right here, it's rolling, and those vanes are being pushed out. I'll get to that in a minute when I channel the fluid for you. Those vanes are being pushed out, and they pull the oil in from here. Well, alright, to get it apart and show it to you, I've got to, it's got this little ring around the shaft here. To get the center part here out and show you all this in detail, I got to get that out. Or I guess I could just take it off like so. So you can see here, you can see where the oil comes in there. If I put this back on, see where the oil comes in there? So when I line up the pins again, when I line up the pins, the oil comes in here, which translates to right here in the small corner of the chamber, if you wanted to call that a compression chamber or something. So the oil is being pulled in from the back side over here, which is actually lining up I think I've got my housing upside down. Yep, I do. So the oil's coming in here, being pulled in right here, Now it's a little bit bigger. And as it comes in, these veins again are being pushed out. And as the pump rotates, these veins being pushed out are pushing the oil around to the other side. And as it comes to a close over here, it's being pushed out the front. So now over here, it's being pulled in here, pumped around with the veins sticking out. To show you one of the veins here. Slide. They're being pushed out. I'll get to that again here in a minute. They're being pushed out. It's rolling around, and the oil is going out that hole right there. It goes out to the front of the housing, and I'll chase that here in a second too. You'll also notice this little groove right here. That groove lines up with this groove you see here. See it there? When you put it together, it lines up here. It connects the two sides of this chamber so that you get fluid that's pressured up on the outer half here, on the back half I'd call it. It gets channeled around through that groove, through that slot to here and over and out into the housing. So there's that. Alright, and now here's the thing. You have two sides going on. Since it's pulling oil from here and here, you could almost call this a two-cylinder engine or something pumping oil. Okay, but it's not an engine, so don't worry about that. So it's pumping oil twice every stroke. They look exactly the same, 180 degrees symmetric, I guess you'd call it. And I don't think you can see it, but down inside here, let me just take this apart. What I'm going to do is lay this down. On the Explorer pump, you can't take this out of the housing without actually taking this pin off. On the Explorer pump, you've got the hub for the pulley pressed on here. So when you get the back cover off, you pull one other plate, and then you can take your needle nose pliers, and I'm just trying to put the end of the pliers on that ring, on the ends of the ring, and I'm just going to push it off one of these days. Yes, I'm an amateur at making videos, but just doing my part to help the Bronco and whatever other world is trying to rebuild a Super Duty power steering pump or Explorer pump. They're the same thing. So I pressed the ring off. There it is, and now this thing slides off. You see the splines on the shaft. The inside of that is splined. I noticed the veins haven't pressed out or haven't fallen out yet. Maybe they won't. So now we get to the inside of this thing. The shaft comes out. You'll notice the grooves around here. You've got, if you look really close at the bottom of these veins, you'll see little marks around them. And actually right down here, let me see if I can point to it with my pick. Right in this area right here, the hole is drilled out a little bit so that you can get oil pressure in there to it. And I find that just cool. And what happens, this back plate over here, when you line up the holes, you will find that back here lines up with the output of the pressure side. So on the back side of the pump here, you've got pressure coming down this channel, getting in here to the middle, which corresponds to this rear plate. So it puts pressure in here on the middle, which is actually back here, like so, and it comes out these holes, and it pressurizes these channels here, which pressurizes the bottom side, the inside of the veins there, and forces them out. The front side of the pump has the same thing in it. Maybe not the same thing. It's got grooves to let that oil out and circulate. And then also one other side note, this is a bushing. The back of the shaft runs on a bushing, and way down in there, I don't think you can see it, but this hole right here, there's a hole drilled to lubricate that bushing. And the best we can tell is that this bushing is actually fed, this actually runs into the supply side of the pump, so it's not under pressure. So the best we can tell is the pressure here is being sucked into that bushing and pulled out into the return. Actually not sucked in, but pressured into the bushing, and that hole back there is actually just a relief for the pressure to just let some oil run in that shaft, in that hole there. So I hope this is all making sense. Going back to our chamber here. It's about 100 degrees where I'm filming, where I'm sitting recording this today. I ought to have a fan running on me. So this is the back side of the pump, lined up the way it should go, and making sure that this groove lines up with the groove in the plate here. You see that groove? I'm lining the pinhole up, the groove lines up there. You get complete line up of all the pressure stuff. So that's how that goes together. Your, I don't know, rotor and vane slides in there. And the other side, that's a lot of oil on there. Lining the holes up. It's going to look something like so. And you might can see down in there how the vanes have a little space to run to push pressure out that hole. So that that pretty much explains the pump, I think. You know, I've worked most of my life in an industry where we use a rotary vane compressor to push air at a low pressure but a good flow rate, you know. Well, in a rotary vane air compressor, the vanes, you don't have any oil in this area. The vanes are pressed out, and they're actually a carbon that if you these are good solid metal, probably high carbon or something. But anyways, in a rotary vane compressor, you deal with a carbon blade that's a lightweight, but it's also very fragile. But they sling out by centrifugal force and work in something similar. Well, because this has got oil in it, those vanes probably would stick if you didn't have any way to force them out. So that's where the grooves, the holes at the bottom of the vane channels comes in. And the pressure in there pushes the vane out, which makes the oil push around the rotor and inside the chamber here. So that's a pretty good overview of how the thing works. Now, can we put it back together? Let's try it. We got our shaft. We're going to have our front, call it maybe a face plate. It's going to go on there, and it can't go past the change in diameter there. We put our rotor on. I'm going to call it a rotor. Making sure to line up the pinholes with the grooves for the pressure to push through. Of course, you'll want to clean all these parts up really good. I'm just throwing it together dirty because I'm not intending on using this pump. These guts are actually out of a 5.0 say a 99 Explorer power steering pump, and I'm putting them in a Super Duty pump because I pulled the Super Duty pump stuff and put in my Explorer pump on my Bronco. So I got that on. Now we got to put our retainer clip back on. And hope it doesn't go flying. If it goes flying, probably just going to let it fly because I don't need it. I see it though. Hang on. This is what happens when everything's covered in oil the way this is. I was hoping I wouldn't get my hands covered in oil, but it's oily. and it's on. Okay, so now the other pin, it's lined up. You got to kind of wiggle it around to get it lined up right. Be sure not to forget this plate. It goes on with the grooves facing the rotor. Oil's going to go in these holes on the ends here and press on the bottom and force in on the bottom of those rotors, those vanes, and push them out again. Then we have the rear cap, and it's symmetrical except for that one spot, and that spot is going to line up with the supply hole into the pump. You probably can't see it, but it's right there out on the. You can see it in there now. So there's your pump. And at this point, don't forget your spring washer. It's going to be like this right here. You see it sticks out off of there. And you want to put that in and make sure it goes in the hole around the boss, I'll call it. Right. Slide the pump in the hole. You might need to persuade this thing to go on down in there a little bit. Or it might be there already. Okay. Remember what I said about that little casting spot sticking out? This is where you got to key up your housing. Remember, you got to get the pressure outlet lined up with that spot down in there on the outside of the bore, of the inside, whatever you want to call that area. There we go. And so I'm going to line it up at the top. Line it up at the top, and I'm going to put it together. And it's not going together. So what we're going to do is put it together piece by piece here. Spring washer. This is the way it goes when you're recording something without practicing several times. I assure you, I put one of these together about 5 times last weekend. Okay, now we're going to do now we're going to do this piece. It's going to go like so. Now we're going to put the pins in. Find the holes. Make sure they're keyed up right. Looks pretty in there. And we're going to put the grooves toward the rotor. This piece, just like the other part, is symmetrical. You'll notice you've got some dots here on that outer part, on that chamber area. I'm not sure what those dots are for. I don't think it matters. Now we're going to line up the pinholes and push the end cap on. Now I remember what it was. That spring washer is pushing up against me. So let's just see if we can get it started. Now I'm going to remember that little hole on the outside. If you ever have to take it back apart, which if you forgot how to do something or forgot to do something, you may find yourself doing that here in about 20 minutes when you get yours put back together the first time. So I'm going to put that in there and just try to start it in the hole. I may have to go put this thing in the vise. Yeah, that's going to be the easiest way. Let me wipe my hands and we'll move the camera over to the vise. Okay. What I've got to do is I've got to get this thing in here so that my vise is pressing on that rear part of the cover. You can see it just barely sticks out there. And that's all it's got to stick out. We just got to catch it and let it press in. I actually need to put my snap ring in there. Trying to clock the ring correctly, remember? And then tighten the vise up a little bit. And this is just pushing against that spring washer in there. On the Explorer pump, I did this by hand, but now you just take your screwdriver, and I don't know if you can tell it here, but the two ends of the ring are really close together there. It's because the ring is not completely pressed in. You got to make sure it's snapped in all the way around. Really good. Now the truth is, on this ring, it's sprung. I messed it up taking it apart the first time. So it's not going to go in right. That's probably why it came out so easily. But you want to be careful not to spring it. Don't ask me how to do that, because when I took my Explorer pump apart, it didn't give me a problem. It just bounced right out. So the pump is put back together, and sorry, put my hand back on it. So now, you know, you're going to have your regulator piston plunger, I don't know what you call it, but your regulator plunger piston thingy in there, your spring, and then the plug that holds all that together. Probably with a seal. I cannot remember if it gets a seal or not, but you know, I put Teflon tape around mine too, and it works. This is where your pressure hose is going to line up and go in the hole. It's probably supposed to have an O-ring around it too. I don't remember that part either. I know that my stuff is sealed and not leaking, so Teflon tape does the same job. So that's the ins and outs. I hope you find this useful, and might save yourself some money rebuilding your own power steering pump. Good luck with it.